Begin at 6:32, and if you can one nation under God, indivisible,
liberty and justice for all.
Steve Kozer. Mike Kusa.
And Shelley is live.
Okay, good. So, any amendments to the agenda? Hearing none. Do we have any minutes to update some amendments? Right to you guys, athletic achievements. So tonight we are going to honor the boys basketball team, the girls basketball team, and a couple of the gymnasts. So we'd like to start with the basketball team, and I think Coach Stotts is going to say a word. Oh, he's going.
While he's come back here, I'd just like to thank all of our student athletes and all of our parents for being here this evening. All of you make tremendous commitments from your time for practice and the games, and there's a lot to celebrate tonight. And we all are so proud of the accomplishments that you all did this year. So congratulations.
So on behalf of our coaching staffs and our players and our parents, we'd like to thank Athletics Department. We'd like to thank the Board of Education for the invitation in recognizing our athletes and our coaching staffs. We had a tremendous winter season, and I would just like to make note of some of our accomplishments of the athletes and coaches that are here tonight. We do have other athletes and coaches that will be recognized at a later Board of Ed meeting. Boys swim had a very successful season this year, and their all-state banquet is tonight. That's why they are not here. So we'll recognize them later on at a later date of a board meeting. So without further ado, let me get started. Would you like to go first?
Boys basketball.
Okay, so the boys basketball team, in our 15-year school history, this was the first year that our boys basketball team made it to the state playoffs. Tremendous season. Their first round opponent was a team called Achievement First out of Hartford. It was a very exciting game. It came down to the last seconds. Score was tied at 60 apiece. Achievement First had the ball, and they scored with about 30 seconds remaining. And our boys came off the court. We called timeout. Coach did a fantastic job all season long, but was very confident that he was going to set up a great play, which he did. He set up a double down low screen, and we had our senior come off the picks and receive the ball, and we moved it around a little bit, and we were able to get up a last second shot from 3 points for the win. We were down 62-60. We went for the win on an away game, and unfortunately hit the front of the rim, hit the backboard, bounced over the front of the rim. Our great athlete, Julian Paps, got the offensive rebound and hit the backboard. Unfortunately, did not go into the tie, and that was the end of the game. So we did lose that game, but I will tell you this: Achievement First was a fantastic basketball team. Very, very talented. They had a great season. They won their next game and lost the third round game. So our boys have a lot to be proud of. Our community has a lot to be proud of. Our coaching staff and our boys' season. So I want to thank them for an exciting season.
So I should have explained this on our last meeting, and I didn't until after going back. I generally announce student first name only because this is live on the internet and to preserve security and safety of our students, make it first names only.
No, it's last.
So if you have a common name, it's another name. Yeah.
Come up anyway.
So the games.
Yeah, you can go, maybe right behind.
How would I hold this one?
There you go.
Okay, Don? Okay, Nathan? Ryan? Jonathan? Ryan? Catherine? Nope. John G. Come on up, yes. Gavin? Kristen? Lucas? Murray? Shoot. Sorry, yeah. Jack? Robert? Very nice. Chad? Julian? And David? And William? This is a large team, so we usually it starts together.
And coaches, join us.
And so, head coach, Dan Rosen and Coach Coleman. We're gonna say, no, guys, this is quick. Serious. See you down there.
Oh, good. I'm so glad.
stay in between.
The cheerleaders did this much faster.
Okay, you're gonna turn like this, man. You're gonna turn like this. You're gonna turn like this. Okay, good. Right in. Looking at my finger. Looking at my finger. Put it back. Looking at my finger. Straight up. Slide it down. Got it tight. Very good.
Squeeze the
Squeeze in the
floor.
middle, guys.
Pretend you like each other. Miller will still kick at you. And then just like 6 punches. And smile. Okay, now smile for everybody. Girls basketball, Joe.
Well, the next up is our girls basketball team. Okay, our gentlemen from the boys basketball team, we have a lot of adults and females in the back that would love to probably have a seat. And you are young and strong, so why don't you stand up? Where we have traveled to Montville High School, okay? And we went up to Montville High School. We played a tremendous game. We were back and forth with Montville the entire game. At halftime, we were leading by 2 points, and girls played terrific throughout the game. Late in the fourth quarter, we had a 5-point lead with about 2.5 minutes remaining in that game. And as the ball bounces the wrong way at times, it didn't bounce in our favor. And Montville ended up getting the ball back with about 12 seconds remaining in the game. And one of their players hit a very difficult shot to take the lead. And we had an opportunity to get the lead back as we were down by 1. And as we brought the ball up the court, an official made a call that, in my personal opinion, was an improper call. And unfortunately, we lost an opportunity to take a last-second shot for a victory. What a fantastic season our girls had. They should be very proud of their accomplishments this year. We do not have a senior on this team, so all those girls gained very valuable experience for next year, and we look forward to next year's season because we know that we are going to advance even further in state playoffs next year. So.
Rachel. Morgan. Lindsay. Lorraine. And Olivia. And Bria. And Maya. And Michaela. Yeah.
Girls.
Okay, our head coach, Noah Gurley, could not be here tonight. She is a coach for lacrosse, so she's unable to make it. Our assistant coach, Joe DiMartino,
No cover.
girls, if you can't see the camera, the camera can't see you. So.
Hey, it's tomorrow.
See.
Okay, and last athletics. Honors for tonight go to our gymnastics program. Okay, we had a great gymnastics season as well. Two of our gymnasts excelled, and I'm going to list the honors that they've received so you can see how well they excelled this year. These two young ladies were both named to the All SWC First Team. They were named to the All Area New Haven Register First Team. They were named to the All State First Team. And one of the young ladies in Greenwich was named to the Academic All-State First Team and also received an invite to compete in May to the Senior WNF Senior National Competition. Is a young and up-and-coming athlete. She is a great girls dive participant as well. She had a great season in the fall. These two individuals have really shown, have put Oxford on the map and we thank them for their dedication, and we congratulate them on their accomplishments.
Oh, that
This will be an easy picture.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, good stocks. Awesome around.
Getting in line.
We're being credit to all of our athletes and all of our wonderful people.
Tell them it's okay if they go.
Oh, yes.
They can
You're
go.
welcome to stay because our meetings are moving. But well, then you're welcome. Just trying to steal them. Oh, no, those aren't mine.
I'm
Oh,
just
they're
saying
over
they're
here.
ladies.
They look the same. I like your style.
Oh, someday.
Sounds great.
I love that they enjoy their evening, recognized, low stress, lots of smiles.
George, you want to do a haircut?
No.
Word correspondence.
Word correspondence, we have Dr. Miller will be, very lovely and much appreciated. Note, dear Board of Education members, we appreciate so much of the time and volunteers in all our schools. Be the very best. The biggest thanks to Bob. Thank you very much.
So we are. So the mic should be on. Test it, make sure. Oh, there it is.
Hi, everyone. It's great to go after all those athletes here. It's great to see all those athletes being recognized. They did great work. So you all have the copy of my March 2022 update. I'm just going to take you through, I guess, the key highlights of it, and then you can ask any questions that you have on it. So, on the front page, it really talks about what we're trying to do to make a concerted effort for fun in the building and some spirit activities. They were up to the kids. We have Spirit Week every week, but I told them it's going to get old really fast if we keep doing it all the time. So we have to really think about when there's key times. And I'll just give you an example. Last week we did March Madness Spirit Week, and then every day in the cafeteria during lunch there was trivia. And on Thursday for St. Patrick's Day, there was guess the amount of marshmallows in the jar. And then all of our trivia winners went into a pool on Friday for a Dunkin' Donuts gift card. So little things like that, I think, really keep the spirit of the school going and help us when it comes to culture and climate. When it comes to strategic priority number 1, we had our second trend walkthrough on February 15th, and then we shared the data with staff on March 16th, and it was really just last Wednesday. It was a really great conversation with staff. We went through a protocol that each school was going to go through at their faculty meetings. And what was really enlightening about the experience was the first step in the protocol was the staff needed to predict which high impact instructional strategies were their strengths. And then they had to predict where the areas of improvement could be. They were spot on. They knew right away where they were really excelling, and they knew where they needed more professional learning and more time to collaborate and time to grow. So out of that meeting, we talked a lot about strategies, and we talked about the district's commitment to the trends that we observed and next steps moving forward in terms of our professional learning and the district commitment to that plan. When it comes to strategic priority number 2, this was our iReady data, and overall, you'll see that we are moving in the right direction. We still have a problem with practice when it comes to equity and accessing iReady, because not every student has a WIT. So WIT is where we provide access to students to work on their iReady personal pathway, 2 days in ELA, 2 days in math, and then we reserve Friday for SEL. But if you don't have a WIT, you don't have that concentrated time. So we're still working on, what's the best solution for that problem of practice. We see a correlation not between minutes spent on iReady and iReady growth, but we see a correlation between lessons passed in iReady and iReady growth and achievement. So we're working on next steps with that. Once this data comes out, right, we have 2 data points now. We meet with our SRBI intervention teams to analyze individual student data to determine next steps. Some students retook the iReady the second time. They took it for a third time because we had individual meetings with students, and we were frank. We said, "Did you put your best foot forward?" "No, this is the letter kind of just sped through." "All right, well, let's try again." And they did, and they jumped dramatically. We also sent the scores to parents because we really want their partnership in some of the accountability with the growth and achievement. And we sent 2 different letters. We sent one if the student took it twice. We sent a different one if they saw 3 or 4 iterations of the test, just to let parents know that there was a reason that the student took it more than 2 times. So we're hoping that partnership will, not that the seriousness of purpose isn't there, because I have to say our kids do want to get better. They want to see their score go up because they get an instant score at the end. But I think having parents as partners will just increase the seriousness of purpose of doing your best on the assessment. When it comes to math achievement, the one area we noticed that's a weakness across all of the grades was geometry/measurement. And what's interesting is I dug a little bit into that with the math teachers. And I happened to be observing a 3rd grade math class, and they were at the end of the unit, and they were moving on to a new unit, so it was the book with the kids. And the new unit they were embarking on was geometry. So, and this is across the board. 7th grade just started 2 geometry units 2 weeks ago, and 8th grade as well. Geometry has a lot of formulas and a lot of memorization. If it's not something that you've been exposed to for a little bit, you tend to forget how to find, the volume of a cylinder or something like that. So we noticed that the smallest gains were in geometry and measurement, but I'm hoping in May we'll see larger gains as that content is being taught right now.
So are the students taking iReady again in May?
In May, yep. So we have 3 data points. So fall, winter, and spring. Yep. And I think in terms of iReady, those are the major talking points of where we are with that. When it comes to strategic priority 3, which is high quality feedback to faculty, I have to say this is one of my favorite parts of the principal job, is just being in classrooms all the time and having conversations about teaching and learning. That's my wheelhouse, and that's what I love to discuss. Right now, we just finished mid-year goal meetings with all teachers, and that's where we talked about their progress towards their individual goals when it comes to our parent feedback goal, their academic goals that they want to reach, and then their social and emotional goals. So we just wrapped those up last week, and then we're going to start another round of informal observation. So that's really on track. When it comes to social and emotional learning, we've been doing really well with our acronym of HERO. We recognize a student a week. If you've been in our building lately, you'll see that we have a mural out in front, and it says, "Oh, that's a hero way." And when students recognize, they get their face and they choose a superhero, and their face goes on superhero, and it goes on the hero. Wherever they want. Our new counselor is Ben. She's really hit the ground running. She's going into classes doing developmental counseling lessons, having to do with career and getting students to think about what they might want to be doing in the future. It's great. Our middle schoolers love it. They love to take the career cluster inventory. They love to see, they're naturally egocentric in middle school. So they love to know what they're good at, what they want to be doing. And so it's great to have that time to talk about it. And we just really continue to look at school-wide ways to encourage a safe and caring environment. I think that's paramount in middle school. You always have to find ways to get them to see the positive. And if there are some negative behaviors, I know you'd be shocked to know that in middle school, but to get to see those negative behaviors as learning experiences to move forward. Anybody have questions for me?
How are you not evaluating walkthroughs? Having all the structure in place, including this now. So
Right.
It's new a little bit.
I have to say, my building they're not opposed to them. I think, when I talked to Dr. Miller about this, what they'd like to see is actually, they create individual feedback. And so with the non-evaluatives right now, we're just giving an affirmation. But they want more. So they say, it's great for you to affirm me, but I want you to tell me what I can do better. Right? So it's interesting. They want to lead to that where we're taking smaller steps. And what I said to them is, we're just one part of the district. All 4 schools have to be there and want to go to that route too. So, and I do say to them, well, we can, Ellen and I, snap that get plenty of feedback. But no, they've been great with
And to follow up on that, we're looking to honor that feedback from the faculty that says, what we would like more. And potentially the next round, if you explore an option of choosing, do you want an affirmation or an affirmation? You want a statement, feedback that is good and walk through. And not just an individual teacher, but the entire school. The entire school chooses to go that route and allow that school to allow that type of feedback and having the schools choose one of those 3 at the next round. Honor what we're doing with the teachers.
I have a question. So looking at some of the data points, the numbers, maybe it's iReady, it's not the best representation, but when it shows, double-digit percentage for being 3 grade levels or behind, I know that, starting in the fall and in the winter, do we expect by the end of the year, by the 3rd iReady test, that we're going to shrink that down? Because 3 or more grade levels, to me, it feels alarming. I think one of them for reading was at 19% at the beginning of the year, and I think it dropped to like 14%. Well, that's a good drop, but still a very high number that are grade level.
Yeah, I know we have the same, we talk about that a lot. There's a great report, and I read it, that, and I have it, it's called Progress to Annual Typical Growth, right? So students should make 100% of their typical growth by the end of the school year. And when you run that report, it gives you data on when it comes to mid or above grade level, all the way down to 3 or more grade levels below, how much progress are they making to typical growth? So if you're 3 years behind, you're not going to make it to grade level in 1 year. But there's data to show how much you're growing. So really, because I was a little bit discouraged about that too. Well, when I look at the report for progress to annual typical growth, our students that are 1 grade level below are 90% the way to their annual typical growth, which means they're making gains, right? Our students that are 2 grade levels below are 114% to their typical growth, which means they've exceeded their typical growth, right? So they're 2 grade levels below. They're not going to make it on grade level, but they're growing. And then our students that are 3 or more grade levels below are at 55% of their typical growth. Remember, that's typical growth at the end of the year. So they still have 1 more benchmark where they can hit that growth. So when you sometimes look at that 3 below, we're like, oh, wow, you know, they're not, that's alarming. But then you dig a little deeper and you see they are actually growing at really great rates. They're just not at grade level yet. And many of these students are students that have individualized education plans. You know, they have documented learning disabilities, and they continue to grow and achieve and surpass our goals, especially at grade levels below. And right now at the winter assessment, they're already at 114% average of their growth.
One thing to keep in mind for this data for the middle school and the high school is that the secondary levels where we saw the largest number of students last year staying home during the pandemic, where they opted to remain home, and that did have a large impact, as we can see in the assessment data at the beginning of the year, on where those students didn't make progress, in some cases slid backwards over the course of academic last year. So there's a lot of ground that we're working to make up. And obviously what we're hearing is that they are making more progress than what we anticipated in normal years, but it's going to take more than 1 year to recover that loss that we lost last year with students.
The reason I bring it up is I mean, the growth that they need to do is so large, it creates almost that, I don't know if I describe it right, but like a danger zone of having a disconnect where they're getting lapped, you know, potentially by their peers. And the differentiation you can do in a classroom, no offense to the further grades, but the further you will go up in education, the harder it is to differentiate. And so when you get that large, I mean, it's not even large. I mean, 3 or more grade levels becomes, at this age, becomes harder. So every year it becomes greater opportunity for someone just to 100% disconnect from school. So to me, you know, the data might show that we're making gains. There might be IEPs, which there should be if they're needed. But there is a great concern of having a larger delinquency come high school and, you know, graduation rate and attendance. And so these things, they start snowballing. So it is a concern. And I'm happy that we're making gains. I'm happy we're testing and kind of keeping tabs on them. I know it helps, and we're putting things in place, but it seems like there's some, to me, some alarm bells that maybe additional resources might be necessary. And if they are, we'd love to know, because I love to see that number be very small for their sake. And not just to have good numbers. You know, we don't just want good numbers for bragging rights. It's to keep them in the education system and keep them engaged.
Yeah, and that, you know, we totally agree, and I think it's just the reality of what we're facing right now. So we have to see the impact of that reality as we move forward.
So on that, when you talked about that percentage of kids who are 3 more grade levels below, 50% towards their improving. So then you've got 50% not know what those numbers correlate to, if that's 20 kids or 60 kids, but, so do you have a, and say that the student is not in SRBI already, does not have an IEP, and is just truly struggling. So do you pull those kids out and offer them any other kind of
Oh, yeah.
reinforcement?
Oh, yeah, so every kid who the way iReady works, like we can see, right, and it's an alert. Every student that some kind of flag comes up in terms of the drop score or steady decline, we flag them, we have lists, and we go through every student in the list. We talk about whether it's engagement, whether we talk, is there actual deficit, does further testing need to happen? Do they need to be in our reading SRBI, our math SRBI? Do they just need work with the school counselor? She pulls lunch groups, she pulls WIC groups. We have paraprofessionals pulling WIC groups and lunch groups. So we're pulling out every resource we have in our building to lift kids up to success. We are, yeah.
And do you find that these, I know this is the first year of iReady and you have more to correlate. Do you find that the kids who are struggling and their academic grades show that as well? So
There's sometimes a definite correlation where they struggle on iReady and they're struggling in school, but a flag gets raised when their grades are pretty good and then they show low, and then that's when we have the conversation and they take it again.
right, this is just a snapshot of how they are
Right.
that day. So it's
Right.
to get a full picture of like how much is this student struggling and in what areas?
Right, so then we look at classroom assessments, we look at past standardized test assessments, so we try to triangulate the data, because this is one data point in many data points that we can have with our students. And oftentimes, we find some social emotional inhibitors to academic success. In middle school, that's when a lot of that rears its head, right? Something stay dormant during elementary school as students are going through some, puberty and some growth and development. A lot of things that were dormant in elementary school rear their heads in middle school, and many students don't have coping mechanisms on how to deal with those snapshots. So we often find students that are not doing well. It's not because they don't have academic ability, it's because something else is inhibiting them.
And just as I think I read in this week's newsletter, was it March 33 just ended? So are we in March 34 now?
No, not yet. March 31st. It
Okay.
ends. April 1st starts quarter 4.
Okay.
It's the
So,
elementary school order that just ended.
okay. So I would just say that I think probably in one of our meetings or in April, it was kind of a DF update. So.
Oh, we have that list. Oh, yeah. We're looking, that's what some of the lunch groups are.
Okay.
We're looking at students that
Yeah,
have
we don't need
isolated.
names, but just, those are kids that obviously, are these kids gonna make it, through,
Yes.
how many Fs, Ds and Fs.
Yes, those are constant conversations, and those are some of our students that are pulled during lunch groups, during WIC groups, after school, before we're doing lots of different things to try to get those students lifted. We have a lot of different issues that we're working through with that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Since we instituted the new math programs,
Yeah,
how have the results been from that from the teacher standpoint of
the teachers love it.
and the kids?
And the kids are doing really well. So one thing about our new math program is we have a commitment to John Patty's high impact instructional strategies. Big ideas, learning target is right, it's written there, the success criteria is there, and as you go into the lesson, there's self-assessment on the success criteria, like you stop, you pause, how am I doing towards multiplying and dividing fractions? And the students stop and they take a breath, so it really integrates well. I actually had a middle school math department chair from Putnam reach out to me today and say they're in the final stages of their pilot of big ideas. They needed to talk to someone who's implemented it. Could I give him some anecdotal information about it? And I listed various things. The online component has been so great for students. All around, just the scope and sequence of it, the formative assessments in there. They're really, it's really been great.
I was going through, I got this chart, I don't know where the chart came. If I get a chart, I gotta take it out and look at it.
Yeah.
That's just my nature. But this chart shows the NBT B5, which I think is grade 5. And those are classifications that, like, it starts out, the first one is really just learning fractions. And it keeps moving up to the last one is relating to formulas. You know, putting that fraction into a box. In a box. We talked about this at the last meeting, geometry for the young kids. So I see this integration from the very early grades to this system here. So this was a pretty in-depth report. It took me forever to figure it out. It seems like each individual student has this. Might even come to this report here. So, but anyway, it shows a good progression of what we're trying to teach. So I think parents are getting this, they get to see that this is where they are, this is what they should be doing, this is the concept. So between what you said and the math program, which I think this is probably part of it somehow. Looks like a decent program. Back to Mike's thing. That gap, we got to narrow that down.
Yeah,
You know, and that's-
I know.
that's a big thing. So it's all good.
Anybody else? Okay, thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
I wanted to certainly take a moment to thank you guys for obviously acknowledging and welcoming all of our student athletes of the past few visits. I think that that's a really important celebration for them. And as you know, just for context, that we're having post softball, it's been a remarkable winter season. So again, thank you for taking the time with that. You do have a copy of the report for the high school. I'm sorry for the length. I just wanted to split the data out a little bit so it didn't all run together. As you can see with the events and things that have gone on, we've already begun the process of the 8th grade transition. We've run through our capstone process with our seniors. We have a couple of seniors that are doing that currently in the second semester. And we've also had our art celebration and a number of cheer activities at school here recently. We're now getting into the testing cycle again. So for us, the PSATs, the SATs, all of that comes to bear beginning tomorrow. It's the national, well, not national day, but the state SAT testing day for all of our juniors. So they'll all be taking that assessment, and this is the second time that we have both our 9th and 10th graders that will be taking the PSATs at their respective grade levels. That tends to be an indicator as you look through the report. We'll go through the iReady piece a little bit, but you'll also see that that is an ongoing process for us and a good way to assess student progress towards college and career readiness. The other items that are coming up in terms of, we have our Honor Society events that are listed there, senior awards. It's come up already, the graduation date, and I think the board typically sets that in April. We're getting to that point. Obviously, the phones are ringing and everybody wants to know when it's happening. So hopefully we can get that solidified pretty soon. Right now, last day of school is Friday, June 17th. Next thing that you're going to see is a list of our account activities. There are a couple of items that have come in, significant items just in terms of dues for a couple of the classes like 2002, and also some money paid out for honor cords for some of those students. Those are the big changes in terms of the accounts. I know that there's been some question about what we're going to do with those residual accounts for the class activity. So we've made some plans, and a couple of the items that typically happen with class dues at the end when there's funds left over. Some of that money gets funneled into Dollars for Scholars or our scholarship program. So each class will then donate a chunk of money for the next couple of graduating classes, and that's distributed when we do our senior awards night as part of the scholarship evening. There's also going to be probably approximately little under $5,000 that would be left for lasting gifts. Typically, each class will engage in trying to find something to add to our campus. If you look at our outdoor classroom, that's one element. We've done different pieces on some of the fields as well. You know, we have different things in mind. The banners that you see in the driveway, those were a gift at one point, those need to be replaced. There's also some talk about doing some stonework, some Belgian stonework outside of our picnic area and maybe increasing that as well, so that our seniors have a little bit more room. As you know, and approved probably a year ago, 2 years ago, the painting of the parking spaces, which we tried to treat and it's come back. So we're looking at using some of those funds to actually seal that, so that we have a blank slate there. Dr. McKinnon, a couple of years back, also put a bench outside when we did our outdoor graduation. We still need to go ahead and have either a plaque or have that engraved. So those are a couple of items that we're looking at. Also some improvements to some of our fields, you know, just some elements to a big banner across the front of the football field, for example. I've seen one in Coggins-Shot that would really kind of dress up our home bleachers as well. Coach Stockwell's also talked about adding a couple of trophy cases to downstairs, because we do have an ongoing list of things to, you know, certainly trophies to house. So those are some of the items we're considering for those funds, and consolidating those funds for the end of the year. So that's that. When you look at district priority one, again, we've been looking at the same thing that's been going on through the whole district. We've had trend walkthroughs recently, and our faculty as well has gone through the protocol to take a look at, predict, and then take a look at what the actual data comes out at. Again, I think our teachers were very accurate in terms of their predictions. The one thing that kind of jumped out to them was basically providing student growth-oriented feedback on work and interactions during the course of the class. That's not always seen during a trend walkthrough, because those walkthroughs are brief. So even if those elements exist, they're not always noted. So that was one area where our teachers felt like they could improve, and we've begun some conversations around that as well. Priority two, you're starting to look at some of the iReady data for the high school. Again, it's one snapshot, and I would also say one of our assessments. I hate to say, but the PSATs and SATs are a bigger driver for us. And this being year one, I think if you look at the first few pages, what you're going to see is our baseline data, both for reading at grade 9 and 10. Those are the only two grades that we assessed. That's the first 4 pages. And then once you get to page 9, you're going to start to look at our grade 9 reading, second round, for fall and winter round. We only assessed kids that were below grade level on the second round. Okay, so those first 4 pages were our baseline. We took all of the kids that were at grade level or above out of that pool and just started to focus on the kids that were below. And so the data that you're going to see in this set is just those students, so it's a subset. Yes, so that's the other piece. Like, if you look at the grade 9 data, both on reading and in math, you're going to see that there's a shift, right, in the winter assessment. Kids are definitely growing. And I think we're making progress in those regards. I think the Big Ideas math program is also very well received at the high school. The teachers are in love with it. The kids are really enjoying the integration of the curriculum and the online component. It's really helping them move forward. So I think all of that's good. Then I start to look at the grade 10 data. And yes, we're seeing some growth, but you also see an uptick in students that are below grade level in the winter, which is kind of odd. So we talk about how we assess them. Same thing would be true with math. There are a couple of students, obviously, that are at that lower level, but we did have a number of students that also grew as well. So when we assessed these students the second time, we pulled students that were below grade level. We had grade 9 English one day, grade 10 English the other day. The next week we did math, and we separated them by grades. to avoid the impact in instructional time, because to run these for us takes a block period and a half, right? So we're talking 90 plus minutes, over 100 because it's self-paced. So we ran those and pulled those kids in a different setting. In the fall, we did them in the classroom and we assessed all students. This time we took the students that were below grade level, plunked them all into one location and ran them through the assessment, self-paced. Okay, so I'm not 100% sure of some of the data. I think our freshmen were much more amenable to the process and engaged in the process than perhaps our sophomores. A couple of different reasons for that. Number one, I believe that our 10th graders from the beginning of the year only felt that they were going to be taking that assessment one time. So there was that component. They weren't as invested. We had just come off of midterms as well. So our students are a little bit spent. And on top of that, as you start to move forward onto page 17, you're just going to start to look at the PSAT data for the different grades. We historically have done PSATs twice in grades 9, 10. They do take PSATs in the fall of grade 11, and then they start the regular SATs in spring of junior year. So what you're going to see in terms of those graphs and the numbers, if you actually go to the second page, is that our students are showing growth from year to year over the elements. The one place that we're starting to see a little bit of a dip right now is with our juniors in math and also our freshmen in math. And that kind of aligns a little bit with where we are with that iReady data. So as much as I'd like to say that the test setting may impact reliability, I'm also seeing it in terms of PSAT data. I'm really going to be curious when we take the PSATs again as to where we are. You know, we took those in October. We're now going to take our second round in March. So that data should be available and something we really need to look at closely in terms of class growth and class averages when we get those results in May. Quality feedback to staff, again, priority 3. We did those trend walkthroughs as a group. We walked through all of that data and came up with some suggestions for our staff for growth, especially in the area of student-centered feedback. The non-evaluative walkthroughs, that was also kind of asked. Mr. Posick asked that question. At the high school, we've kind of hit a reset with it. Our teachers volunteered for this round. We did 4 dates recently. Ms. Kubasek split with Dr. Miller, and Ms. Potter came in on different dates. We had different groups going in and doing those walkthroughs. Our teachers volunteered for them, but didn't know exactly when we were coming. I think part of it, the experience for them was to have a little bit of control and to pick a date and a period that matched well. They had an idea of what the questions were going to be when we kind of came through, what we were looking for, and providing feedback. I think, like in the middle school, our teachers didn't just want the affirmations, they wanted to know what they could do to improve. So that buy-in is starting to happen. I think that we hit that wall in the fall with the process, but I think because we've taken time and really involved them in the process and explained it to them, that they understand, what can happen here. Social emotional learning, just a couple of pieces. Obviously, our advisory program is our biggest connection to students. That meets twice a week for 20 minutes. And those faculty members are not people that obviously are connected to them in the classroom setting necessarily. And ideally, those advisors stay with those students for 4 years. So that's a connection opportunity that happens a couple times a week. The other thing we've got coming up at the end of the month is Inclusion Week, which is through Ms. McCaffrey and our Unified class, who was also just awarded the St. Michael's Cup again for the first time since 2013. So just kind of recognition for that. We have a whole host of different activities planned. We also managed to bring our first motivational speaker, and he's going to be talking about inclusion, leadership, school culture, and we'll work with the student body as a whole. And this is during that last week of April, and then we'll work with a small leadership group for 2 additional hours. This will be the first time that we get presented for the whole school. I think that these are planned for those experiences, and we're excited to sit down and type of
the summer before school starts. And I know iReady is new, and I don't remember that you guys took something like the iReady, the high school took that, when we had the previous program, right? They did.
Did.
Okay.
We took STAR. I don't think they took
So my question is, do you sit down so that it can be mapped out, so they're not, just tested to death?
We need to take a look at, number one, what kind of data are we gleaning from iReady? Knowing that the middle school is going to be running that 3 times. If I had to, I think Ms. Coop second, I need to sit down and really look at the data this summer. Knowing that kids have everything from PSATs a couple of times a year at our level, SATs for our upperclassmen, APs anywhere between sophomore and junior year, NGSS for the science standards. We've got a lot going on in terms of assessment. If I had to, off the top of my head, what I'd like to use iReady for primarily is knowing that the middle school is going to be using it 4 times in 8th grade. It would be a great mark for us, maybe midway through 9th grade, because we're not going to see any true difference between spring and when they come right back in the fall. That would give us a window of growth to look at. As to whether we're going to use that, going forward with our sophomores, that's really the top end that we tried this year. I think we have to really look at the data in terms of not only the performance, but look at that against student performance in the classroom to determine whether or not it's worthwhile. Certainly, we can see individual student progress, and we can also see if students, kind of rush through the assessment. That's another indicator that we can get through iReady. So we really need to try to figure out how valid this is for the 10th grade. Certainly, I think for the 9th grade, it's a valuable tool in terms of the transition. It's just a matter of time.
And the same thing as far as the T's and F's, probably.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. We cross-check these. I think our quarter ends close to the same day. We're a little bit different because of the final exams.
Because I know in the past, especially during the pandemic, our T's and F's were scary.
Yeah, and those are reviewed on a regular basis, the same way that we're looking at kids. We use this as one data point, but we also use the T's and F's, and teachers that may be referring kids to SRBI. The other thing that we're looking at doing, I've spoken to Dr. Miller a little bit about it, is I know during the budget process, there was a lot of focus on our ELA and math labs. So one of the things that we're looking at doing, we're going to kind of use 2 different models. With math, what we're trying to do is go with the coaching route. So in other locations in the district, you have a coach that's assigned for that purpose. So this individual would be available for the most part through the span, through the day, right? They would still have their preps contractually, but they would be able to pull kids from classes and push in. Our biggest challenge in terms of using those resources is when we identify kids and using those is getting those kids into the limited sections that we have, because we have to completely change a kid's schedule. And the ripple effect is huge. You could be changing 5 different academics just to fit a kid into a lab, when we're probably better served if we have a person available to do a pull out, right? Or have a teacher push in if need be. So we're looking at a couple of different ways that we can provide an increased level of support for those kids that are legitimately multiple grade levels behind, if the data is true.
Mike, we'll start with it.
This just is a continuation from before. We have the new math program. I know it was split into 2 different sections. It's slightly different. How's it working at the high school? And how is can we hire? It's a math coach at the high school.
That is on the next floor. That is on the next floor.
Yeah, elementary.
We haven't hired a coach. What we're looking is redistributing our FTE to provide that same type of service next year. So that will probably increase some of our math sections, but we want to keep them at a tolerable level first and foremost. But we also want to be able to provide support services throughout the continuum of our day. So we're going to use an existing resource to do that. As far as big ideas math, again, I think we're on the same page. Our teachers are in love with it. The kids not only are thrilled to know what the success criteria is in a given period and be able to evaluate themselves, but they've also got that online element to cross-check when they don't know where they stand. It's a great backup tool. And our kids seem to be adjusting very well to it. It is, we're also in a little bit of a different continuum in math. We made a shift a number of years ago. Historically, in math classes in high school, it was Algebra 1, Geometry, Algebra 2. We changed our sequence a couple of years back, and we've added big ideas. So really being able to provide resources and support for kids in math in the future is a focus area for us.
Okay, one last, do you have strong communication with the middle school, 8th grade stuff coming into high school? Coordinate because they're two separate programs, they're the same, but they're two different things. So you're coordinating that, you're saying your product from the 8th grade is coming into my business freshman is improving, you're having that dialogue, conferences, different things that.
Not at this point. We do a lot of that transition when we get close. The only way that that really comes to bear right now is in terms of course recommendations for students for next year. There is articulation in terms of where students stand and anything that might catch the attention of a school counselor. So there are transitions that happen around academics, but we don't have any direct communication right now in terms of what's going on with middle school and what we're doing currently.
Okay, I'm gonna key in the word right now, because the concept of doing this math program, okay, was gonna be one all the way through.
Yes.
So that was forced, okay?
Yes.
Decided not to do that, have two separate ones, similar but separate, okay? So that's never gonna work if you're not sitting down with the 8th grade product that you're getting. It's still gonna be disjointed. You're still gonna see numbers like this, because even though they're similar, they're gonna be different. And that's what we've been trying to eliminate, is this dysfunctional system of teaching. Got to at least K to 8 is straight.
And I think that the shift in department chair models will address that, because that is district-wide, that's an issue. There's alignment of curriculum between the middle school and the high school, and that's the focus of the shift. So if you have somebody that's doing STEM work specifically, there's going to be ongoing conversation around curriculum and how students are finishing middle school and adjusting to high school. That's really the whole reason for the shift.
And that is the reason why I brought that to the table, is that articulation doesn't exist on the high school, and I want to create a formal structure that's going to make that happen.
Yeah, we have to build the capacity to do it. And I think once we have the right people in place, it's going to fall into place.
I can say, Joe, just quickly, informally, that our 8th grade teachers have been meeting with high school teachers. They email back and forth, and there has been a couple of times that the high school department chair and math teacher have come down and sit with our 8th grade teachers, and they've mapped out some vertical articulation. So that's
I
been
love
great.
that vertical articulation.
Yeah.
But great, that's
Yeah.
what we were working on.
Yep, and so that has
Yep.
happened informally, and then we'll meet in May with transition meetings between students that we need to meet about as they go up to the high school.
Especially using the iReady data. You know, she'll have a third set in.
Yeah.
We'll really be able to target students and what their needs are as they come through the door.
Rob, you started your presentation by saying that iReady was just a snapshot, but the PSATs and SATs were the bigger driver for you.
They are at the high school level.
All right, I'm looking at the chart on page 18, and I don't think I'm understanding it. So just take us through that a little bit, and just remind me again, what's the highest score you can get on the PSAT nowadays?
Okay, so on the 8th and 9th grade PSAT, the range is 240 to 1440. Okay, on the 10th grade PSAT is 320 to 1520. And the same is true of the regular PSAT for 11th grade. Once you get to the standard SAT, obviously the shift happens to go to 1600. What you're looking at in terms of the scores that are there are the success marks are in parentheses. Okay, so if you look at that top line, for example, with our juniors on the PSAT, our total average, student average is 990. Obviously, there's students that are going to be above that. There may be some students below that, but our mean for language arts is 515. The cutoff score for that measure is 460. That's established by the, within each individual state. And then you see our math average and then what the cutoff score is there. So we're seeing a little bit of a dip with our juniors. They were making progress initially through both 9th and 10th grade. Their PSATs in the fall, that's where we started to see a dip in terms of the math number. And then obviously it's the same. So you have the mean average for the student population in the class of 2024, both in terms of language arts and in terms of math, we're both above what the state cutoff would be. And same thing would be true when they took the PSAT 9.
So with the numbers that are in parentheses, is that?
Those are the cutoff numbers. So we are above those cutoff numbers.
So it's 460 for the PSAT 21, and then our average, mean average at 515. Is that how you read that?
Yes, yes.
I still don't understand, what do you mean by cutoff?
So the state puts out, well, they put out a critical success number for each state. And for the state of Connecticut on those assessments, it would be 460 and then 510 on math. So that's established by the College Board. They look at the entire state and they come up with what the average is, what the average cutoff would be for student success.
So are these scores good, bad, in the middle, like, I don't know.
I mean, we're above what our average student is above what the cutoff score would be in many places. The one issue that I can see is with the juniors, with math that they took in the fall, that was a spot of a dip. And the other incoming class, our current freshmen, when they took it for the first time, again, you're gonna see a dip there on the math side.
So is there something that you're not getting that you need from us that can make these scores better?
We're currently doing SAT preparation. So students have been signing up to do both language arts and math prep. That's kind of been an ongoing feature at the high school. Different teachers do that.
Is that a free thing or do they have to pay for that?
I think kids were signing up for that. So that's not overall. Students also have access to Khan Academy beginning in 10th grade, which gives them individual feedback from their reports and specific items that they can work on as well in terms of preparation. So our teachers are doing it in the classroom, but kids can do work on the outside to improve those numbers as well. I think our structural change on the math side in terms of the supports will translate into increased scores. I think that resource is going to be helpful. And I also think, the more comfortable our kids become with big ideas math, that we're also going to see increases on that side as well. I think in language arts, we're making solid progress. I think the shift in terms of students they are doing some common text work, but I think that the fact that students can self-select some books and do reading and writing as part of their everyday existence in English, I think that we got kids to read more than they were. Right? I can think of a bunch of novels that I probably didn't read when I was in high school. I think probably all could. But when you give students some choice, I think that they engage in reading. I think they engage in reading in a more genuine fashion. I think that's what I would say. There's still room for common text, but I know our kids are reading and they're enjoying what they're reading. Right, they have to integrate the skill aspect of it, yes. If you can do the best of both worlds, if we could get kids, reading what they need to, what they want to read, and be able to free write about that, I think that's a wonderful experience. But there's also some elements that need to be continually integrated, right? Yes.
You mentioned, we keep jumping.
So I have a couple questions. So we get the iReady test in the fall, and I know that in other schools that for example, the middle school, they take the results and they work it with, and they have the labs or whatever you want to call them for all the kids to kind of improve the areas that they need. What does the high school do with those scores? Because I know they don't have the dedicated time like WIT that the middle school does to kind of take those scores, take those areas of improvement and work with them.
So we look at a cross section of the iReady data. We also look at student performance in the classroom. So we have a number of different teams that meet on a weekly basis to look at specific kids and what's going on in those specific classes. Teachers do have access to iReady. Are they implementing it across the board and really focusing on that? I think it depends on the individual student and what their needs may be and how those different data points are emerging. So I think iReady is one piece of it for us, but I also rely on my faculty and what they're seeing in the classroom with student performance. So we got to get to what the issue is. And there's a number of different ways that we can get there.
And I mean, not to piggyback what I mentioned for the middle school, but some of those numbers, especially for the students who are below 3 grade levels and below, that they took the test again in the winter, the difference really, at least I was looking at some, they didn't look like they were making big jumps. You know, it was like, you know, of the group that were below, it's like they went from like 41, 42 to like 39, 38. I mean, they're making growth, but there's still, it doesn't feel like we're closing the gap, and it feels that the concerns we have for what's happening at the middle school is amplified at the high school.
Yep. And I think that for 10th grade specifically, I'm curious about the validity of that data. I do believe that our 9th graders walked in the winter and put forth their best effort to improve. I think that their investment in the process was genuine. I'm not 100% sure that that's the case of the data that you're looking at with our sophomores. I think some of them did, but I also know that, as I said, I don't think that they anticipated that it was going to be a baseline assessment in the fall, and that was all that was going to be asked of them. So I'm not so sure that they brought to bear what their true skills are, right? Which is why we have to use this in combination with student performance in the classroom.
Because I mean, just as a baseline, just a number report, to me, it's a huge alarm bells. And I understand, you know, I mean, my son personally, you have to kind of smack him in the arm, don't take it seriously. He didn't see some good growth. And I'm sure that is possible, but it is concerning because at the high school, it's really hard at that point to start differentiating and to closing gaps. So if you have a gap from, 9th grade, algebra 1, when you hit algebra 2, how much can you really go back and cover what you didn't get in algebra 1? When you hit geometry, how much can you really cover what you didn't get in algebra 1 and algebra 2? Closing those gaps, it feels almost impossible. Mix in the fact that I think we're looking for, as you were saying, a coach to do push and pull and maybe do something with the lab. Is a single coach with that many students who needs assistance going to be enough?
I think to address I think to address the gaps that an individual student may have, you're going to be able to work on a specific skill with one student and then maybe work with another in the same class on something else that they're missing. So you can use that iReady data, but I think you're also going to use things like midterms and finals and common assessments along the way to really find out what students know and what they don't know. What I like about the idea of shifting on the math side is that we can service a larger number of students than we currently can. Our current model is to reschedule students and to try to plug them into a spot that it may not work for them. By shifting the model on the math side, I think we're going to be able to service student needs across the board.
I like the model. I just was wondering if there's enough resources being assigned to it for the quantity of students that need the help.
I think my math teachers as a department will utilize that resource more effectively, knowing that they have one person that's going to be working with kids in their individual classes, right? It's a little bit more challenging when you have multiple teachers and they're only locked into certain periods. It's tougher to plug those resources in, right? So I think the way that we're designing it now, our math teachers will be able to utilize that person more effectively to address the student needs. So I think it's a combination of the two. Accessibility, but then also utilization of the resource. Our teachers in general will modify, they'll do whatever they can for kids, they'll be flexible with kids, but it doesn't necessarily hit every gap. So I'm hoping the coach model will, the shift in that will help us.
Good, thank you. And just a question on that. So, besides this one test, so how do we know the coach? When do we measure how do we know exactly he's not working effective or not working? How do we measure that?
That's something we have to talk a little bit about. I think what we're going to be looking at is how do we collect data on the students that we're working with, right? And if it's specific content, how are we noting that? And then how do we note improvement? Maybe iReady becomes more of a tool that we use to dive to assess the effectiveness of that coach with a given student. That may be the tool and utilization for us for kids that are outside of the scope of the freshman and sophomore that we currently assess this year. We can use that tool. So if we're working on long division, for example, right? If the coach is either pushed in or pulled out and really working with the student on that gap, can we then assess that on iReady to see the effectiveness of it, right? So we do have to collect some data in terms of the number of students that they're working with and who they're working with, right? And what they're working on. So that's all part of it. Yeah, specific skills in there that we need to focus on, and then reassess that.
And what about, you mentioned math, you mentioned ELA or?
So ELA has been, I think we have 4 sections currently of the ELA lab, but it's the same issue. Right? We have the same accessibility issue, changing kids' schedules to get them into that resource. Right now, we're going to increase that to 5. So we're going to be able to cover more of our span. We're going to use only 2 teachers to do that work. It will be much the same. It'll either be pull out or push in. And those 2 coaches will also sit in on our SRDI teams, so that they're part of the conversations about those students and specific things that need to be addressed.
But it's not
One thing that's changed that model to an intervention coaching model. That's like the math instead of every one person to the 2.
right. ELA lab.
Right, it's not a lab. It's to target interventions to support specific students.
Yep, either push it or pull out. It will be that, because then we don't have to, especially with 5 periods, we're covering most of our day. So now we can still do the same thing that we're doing on the math side, but we're just utilizing 2 teachers in ELA to get that done.
Looking at the numbers and so forth. Again, like some 2 kids in their biggest burnout is block days. And we're talking about resources and so forth. Are we reviewing this because as far as stagnation or proper resources?
So there have been some conversations about, I guess our schedule's been in place for quite some time. There are pros and cons to the way that our schedule operates. I think we're one of the only districts that runs a hybrid 1 through 8 and then 2 block days. Some schools are just block, where it's 1 through 4 and then 5 through 8, they just alternate. And there are other schools that are like an 8-period day. They take 2 out per day, and they even rotate periods so that you don't have issues with timeliness in school or departure from school.
Yeah, that's what my kids tell me every day. Like, I don't want to go into school with block days.
Block days are tough. So part of what we're looking to do next fall would be to pull together a group to kind of study what our district's needs are, not only from a student perspective, but from a teaching perspective, and look at instructional time and all of those things, and then potentially bring some information and recommendations back to you mid-year. The timing of that really aligns to the build of our master schedule. We can't just flip because of the way that we build in Power School. And it also, in my estimation, requires a number of different stakeholders to be involved in that conversation. And there's a lot of legwork to be done. So I've done it in other schools where we examined, different schedules and the effectiveness of it. And then ultimately, we'll make a proposal and figure out how to proceed. So I'm not 100% committed to, our current schedule's been in place for a while. I think there's some benefits to the block. It does allow us a little bit of additional time for labs in general CPE science courses. I think the other big benefit is, those classroom presentations that need to happen or any large projects, at least those can be done within a given period. So there's some benefits to the block, but I don't know that we're 100% committed to it.
What's the percentage of kids that are like sitting in study halls for those block days or something? I mean,
It would be no different than what they would be on a 1 through 8.
no,
It's just the study halls are longer. Yeah.
That's my point. I mean, and I'll be honest with you, like I said, my kids are sitting at like one at a time, but go backs to the chairs, so they can hold their backs, they're checked out. I mean, is there a potential, like changing the schedule of freeing up resources for, say, teachers and so forth to be working with kids during, like when they the block days? Is there any potential?
Well, we're kind of bound by teacher contract in terms of the number of teachers, the number of periods a teacher can teach.
Yeah.
That's all contractual, and they need to have a certain number of preps and a duty at some point. So there are different parameters in the teacher contract that kind of govern what we can assign teachers and what they can do.
But I mean, I'll give an example. If we have that information prior to contract negotiation with teachers, it's something that the district could, bring to the table as far as negotiating. Like if there's potential to, allocate resources to different things like that, I'd be open to that discussion. I don't have a date. I'm curious to know. Yeah.
I think by, schedule we learn a lot this year.
Yeah.
So we'll be able to definitely work next time. Because then we won't have 5 kids allowed.
Right. And
Really.
that's my concern.
Yeah.
Right, and so those labs and the use of those labs, again, the big challenge for us is changing the student schedule to fit into the limited periods that we have. I think by changing the model and how we deliver services, we're going to be much more effective in terms of getting to students. But that still doesn't address the question about block, no block, but that's not a decision for me to make as an individual. It requires a number of stakeholders and then a lot of investigation before we can come forward with something. And what that group might recommend to you.
And really the structural shift of changing from an ELA and a math lab where students are assigned a class for additional support is very different from the model that we're approaching, which is more of a tier 1, tier 2, so SRBI model where we're targeting specific students, giving interventions for the student acquisition. And that's the type of model that we have at the lower grades that we're trying to implement in high school, which is really designed to support specific student needs, targeted during their challenges and be very.
As a civilian, with all this current blockade and stuff like that, I know about blockades, not blockades. The change in philosophy or structure of the department heads, my understanding of this, the conversation that was done. Where people into the different blocks.
It's going to put, it's going to get some of the department chairs that are currently released for a period of day back into the classroom teaching.
Now, does that help throughout the K to 12 or is that mostly high
That's high
school?
school.
That's in high school. So you have a resource, you have bonuses. That's 5 extra teachers.
Well, we are, I think with the,
For one block.
I think with the new shift to the department chair model that we're going to, obviously we're going to keep some of our most experienced teachers in the classroom a little bit more, right? And they won't be in charge of evaluations. They'll be focused on curriculum and curriculum alignment. And that's a district priority, right? As you pointed out, is how do we make sure that those kids that are coming out of middle school are going to be ready for whatever's next, right? And how do we really know where they're leaving off, right? So that transition becomes the focus.
Anybody else have questions? So on so when we do these, when we don't Andre level or club, we don't ever know if those kids have an issue. If they're slipping or if they're having problems, we're not testing those kids. We don't really know. Slipping in there.
These are the students that were below grade level in the fall.
The ones on the right hand side, let's say students not grade level or above grade level. We didn't test them. When do we not?
In the fall, you tested everyone.
In the fall, we tested everyone. In the winter, we only tested students that were below grade level.
So every student you see in K-9 on, we're tested twice.
So those first data points from, say, page, let's see where it starts. Page 5, those are our fall data points for each grade for all of the students that were assessed.
Thought is that what if someone in the fall was on target and on grade level, but there's a slip?
That's why we need to take a hard look on assessment for next year. That's a conversation we'll be having with our admin machine and tune in during the summertime and planning on for next year. The methodology that was used for this year, where we only did a cohort of students we recognize, is not the approach that we should have taken. We couldn't go back and retest those students that we didn't test, but we're going to change this methodology moving forward for next year.
And part of our discussion, I think, is about what assessments we run, when we run them, and what's the value of them, across the board. So we have to kind of look at that, I think, as a admin team, and then figure out how to use the data effectively. We did focus on the students that were below grade level for our second round, feeling comfortable that when they took the test in grade 9 and 10 in the fall, and they were doing it in the classroom setting, they were putting forth their best effort. They didn't know what it was, right? So you go in and you're like, okay, let's give it a shot. And I think that the fall data is genuine in terms of the numbers of kids that we have that are at or above grade level. And now we have to start to focus on the kids that were not, which is why we assess them specifically.
So we messaging the 10th graders, well, we got to lie and say, we're going to do it. We have to data points.
We haven't had that conversation about retesting them again in May. Knowing that I've got PSATs coming again tomorrow, that's kind of where I want to see what that is. If that information comes back in a timely manner, and I can look at that and still see that I think our average is still increasing in terms of student performance, then we have to make that determination. There may be kids in here that I really need to look at more closely, so maybe more targeted than even what we did in the winter.
PSATs are done in class or
PSATs, we do grades 9 through 11 tomorrow.
Tomorrow in school.
Everybody.
In school. And one of the
We do it twice a year.
Yeah.
We do it in October, we do it in March.
And one of the things that we need to do deep analysis is correlating the iReady data to the PSAT and SAT data. What type of information is it telling us? Are we seeing students that are being successful in one area and not the other assessment, or are we seeing that they are in alignment with each other? What's the data telling us? We need to do a deep dive and analysis of that in the spring and the summer.
it seems like it's not a clean invested product of this process. It's not a clean transition from other investments for college. Is the value for PSAT more as an assessment of current learning, or is it something that is thought of as college credit?
It's both, because the PSAT 9 is actually an 8-9 version, and it's geared towards kids at that level. So the content is geared towards that grade level. PSAT 10 is different, all by itself, for the same reason. And then the PSAT that students take as 11th graders is also more advanced, right? And obviously the last stop before they start taking the real SATs and or ACTs. The other thing we have starting, I mean, it doesn't impact, I don't think it's many of our sophomores, is that we also have AP testing going on the first 2 weeks of May. And NGSS for 11th graders.
Do you have time to teach on those?
That was kind of the crux of it. When we opted to really focus on students that were below grade level, the reason was that it takes as much time as it does, and the number of assessments that the kids are going through during the course of a given year. So we just come out of midterms and just shifted into semester 2. So that became our priority, was looking at kids that were below grade level.
As far as summer work or whatever that is, as a new team, once you can look at this, you can map it out in order so that it's just not, counting tests
That's, yeah,
And
that's it.
It is just, but it also has to be, mapped out in sections that make sense, but you have to give them time to learn and time to grow. So, it's not a one size fits all. And I don't think that if you came up with that kind of protocol, it would make even more sense to us as the board when we get that information.
As I said, I think ninth grade, off the top of my head, I think it's a great tool for transition. For iReady, we have to look at the data a little bit more to see what kind of value we're gonna get down the road. It may be more of an intervention technique to assess how students are progressing.
Motion. Yeah. Is it just, I'm sure you guys have vast experiences with other high schools. And, I don't know. That would be interesting to find out too. If you correlate the districts that you're going to do pure spending, spending more money on, each student doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get results. And you look at these districts and the resources they have and the amount, and sometimes there are districts who spend less than we do, and then the results are better. So then why is that? Isn't the way their schedule is? Isn't the way, they're what they're offering? So it's just great to compare with our surrounding towns.
Agreed. Yeah, I've worked in a number of different high schools and they all run different schedules. So, and they get to the curriculum in different manners and kids adjust.
Right.
It's also a matter of what teachers are accustomed to. Some teachers are great at teaching the block, love it. Some kids love it. If you're doing the block every day, schools adapt to that.
Right.
But there are also other schools that will, take 2 periods out, have kind of a middle length class on a regular basis. Not every class meets every day, and you still find a way to make it work. But that'll be part of the process in the fall for us.
Yes.
Oh, absolutely. Another thing, yeah, thank you so much for the support of that. He does a remarkable job. Absolutely.
The kids today making it, I was down there, they were so excited.
It was great.
Problem is they keep showing up with food in our office. It's not good. Desserts.
And I think the important part from that last comment is we spent a lot of time talking about traditional assessments. This is a performance assessment. The fact that students participated and graded and cooked and prepared, it shows that the students have other skill sets. And we've got that in arts, and we've got that in athletics, and our students are able to rise to the surface, and it shows in many different ways that they are learning these skills and these activities, and they're able to demonstrate that at a high level. And it's not just traditional math or language arts.
Good guys, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome to.
Take the cue.
So, but you have to bring it to your voice, because every morning I think you're growing a little more. You must be going broke.
Thanks, Rob.
Oh, absolutely. Folks, lastly, all of those things that are on, I think, page 2 or whatever, in terms of upcoming events, you're more than welcome. Please come celebrate our kids, especially as we get down the stretch. So those honor society inductions and everything else that we've got going on, kids love to see that.
Thanks, Rob.
Thank you.
I'll try to go quick to recognize the time of the evening now. I know that I had a chance to privately thank you as a board publicly. This month is Board of Education Recognition Month. And for those of the audience watching online or watching a recorded video, I just want to say from the bottom of my heart that our Board of Education here is so committed and so passionate and so knowledgeable and work as a true team on the best interest of our students and staff in this district. And most people don't realize the number of hours that you put into the work that you do. It's not just attending a Board of Education meeting on every other Tuesday night. Your committee meetings, you're attending Board of Finance, Board of Selectmen meetings, you're on the phone with me. You're reading our packets over the weekend, you're sending questions, you're in the work, and you really care deeply about the students of this district. So on behalf of all of our students and our staff, and community, I want to thank you for all that you do on behalf of Goodings. We shared with you this evening in a revised application. It doesn't need to be voted on, but at our Board of Finance meeting, when we presented the budget, Jack highly asked us for more capital. We wanted all the stuff that we would think of that we could use. I had a conversation with him this afternoon. We look at ways to get us additional revenue in order to put in the repairs that need into the facilities. I don't know where it's going to go, but we've taken some work. We've gotten some quotes. We've added additional stuff. It's well more than we were had in mind, but it gives conversation with Board of Finance on the type of work that our facilities need. So this is a revised version. So I want to thank George and Anthony for all the time that they spent on putting that together. In terms of the operating budget, I had a conversation once ago with Jack this afternoon. The public hearing is scheduled for April 18th. He did confirm that with me this afternoon. That's an opportunity for parents, for board members to show up, community at large to address any portion of the budget. They could say, subtract, they could add to any particular department to the school budget. The Board of Finance will listen to that, and they'll take that back and they'll continue their deliberation. I asked them when we will have an opportunity to go back to them to answer their questions and hear their feedback on our specific budget. Right now, they're still working on the individual departments this week and next week. He thinks we might be invited back the first week of April, but he doesn't have a definitive date yet. But he's still working on that for us. As I addressed with them in the meeting, the Board of Finance, this is the earliest we can give us feedback on any reductions that we're going to need, the better, because we need time with our staff to go back and the board and the finance committee to really adjust where those reductions will be. And giving us a number the last week in April does not give us sufficient time for these conversations. So knowing that, I'm trying to do some of the pre-work now. We have a session with our administrative team next Wednesday to talk about budget reductions. I had a conversation with the OEA leadership, the president, vice president, and officers of each school last week, talked to them about the budget, asked them for feedback and where we might need to go for reductions. I don't know what the reductions are. We don't know what those are. But if we can have those conversations where we might go and have ideas of, okay, if we're asked for 100,000 or 200,000, 300,000, these are the places we go. If we have those ideas generated before we're given a number mid to late April, it puts us in a better position. So we're trying to figure it out and have those conversations, engage staff and have not just from the top down, but more of a collaborative effort where these reductions could be. The danger is we have the conversation that any reductions we take, we've done so much trimming around the edges, it's going to most likely need to be sacked, and that hurts. And that ends up most likely needing to be class size. Where that class size is in elementary school, we don't know. But if we're looking at $500,000, that's not just one or two staff members that would be decided to become significant. So that's not something that we want. We want to be able to articulate that to the community. Have conversations with the district club, have conversations with the PTO, and really help the parents understand what the true consequences are of any budget reduction, so that they are able to articulate as well and show up at these meetings and speak on their own personal side of what education is to them and their family, and what any reductions would be to the community. Just educate the parents, the community, as to what that's going to be. Professional learning is scheduled for Friday. We have 4 day week of students, staff, all teachers, paraprofessionals have Friday off. Secretaries will do professional learning. We'll have secretaries in the morning, we'll have technology related PD. And Anthony's going to work with them in the afternoon for some business related stuff, to bring some continuity to their work. So that's something that I'm looking forward to what he's doing. Teachers are engaged in 2 areas. They're going to have some formal 45 minutes of instructions on executive functioning and SEL. And each teacher is going to be asked to work with their teams and their departments on developing action plans We're implementing some new way of teaching students those executive functioning skills and SEL in their classroom. Develop an action plan with their team. Present that action plan back to the principal before the end of the day. Work on trying that new implementation of both those areas for the next 5 to 6 weeks. And then having volunteers report back at faculty meeting departments in end of April in their schools to showcase what they've tried and help learn from each other. So it's not just come in one day and walk out the door. There's a planned effort of let's learn, let's grow, let's work together, and then build from there. We also recognize that teachers have been through a lot in the last couple of years, and we're trying to give the teachers that formal instruction, but also time for them to work with their teams, but also some unstructured, some their own SEL fun time. Not an entire day, but there's some pieces of the day that we're saying here, use and enjoy at the end of the day, after the we're going to have a nice social that will be posted we talked about that in the school. So, looking forward to the and Sunday for we have certified administrators and special education coordinated service. And now we're putting that out there. We had at least one applicant that applied because of that. So that was what your fire effort and just email with the process.
It was banned for spamming 2,500 administrators. Yeah, it's all right.
Yeah. This was a great week in terms of middle school celebrating academic performance. We had a group of middle school students last night that were honored and inducted to the Oxford Middle School Honor Society. They do it early enough so the students have an opportunity to engage in some volunteer work between now and the school year. So it's nice to begin to getting that season of having recognitions for students. We did so athletically early tonight and academically last night. There will be more of that. The high school play is scheduled in April 22nd and 23rd, or so that's Friday and Saturday.
I
Right after.
didn't read my email.
Yeah. It's coming up after the break. The students are hard at work almost every day that's going forward, preparing for the play. So I'll send out the date. It's on a Friday and Saturday night. So I encourage you to attend that. The strategic operating plan I referenced in, I gave you a copy of the current draft of the theory of actions, priorities, and SMART goals. Our intent is to send out a survey to parents and gather emails from stakeholders across the community that want to participate in the survey, giving us feedback on how they think our work has been to this point. And then we're right on schedule. The plan is for us to evaluate the data next month and then begin developing the action plans that go along with those priorities in May. So we're exactly where we anticipated to be. Scheduling, we met with the the elementary school principals this week to talk about scheduling parameters and the criteria, such as how to re-enter equity for students that are in special education or in the 504 plan or in the SRB interventions, and the principals are having those conversations with their staff, either in small group or at the professional learning day in the debate on Friday. You heard Rob mention the SRBI coaches at the high school. We are moving forward with the model of having one high school math teacher being released and being a coach all day long, and having a second model of that. There'll be two teachers, one at 0.4, another 0.6, assigned in language arts. We're exploring how both of those models work next year, which might work better. But we are moving forward with that shift and away from the lab as they are, because structurally they don't work the way that they need to work in moving more towards the true SRO model for next year. So I'm excited that we have a shift to that for next year. We got that standing for that.
Why did you decide on the two people? ELA?
From the staffing perspective and from the buy-in perspective, we felt it was necessary to take that one small step for next year.
So with that, are you saying you're going to take two existing ELA teachers and one will, whatever, teach 2 classes?
Yes.
And then everyone, and then the other one maybe will teach 3 classes?
Yes, and they'll decide, kind of where their training period would be during that day based on where the interventions are needed. So it's not going to be through I need to block students in periods 1 or 2, but if the grade is not a student either in periods 1, 3, and 4, then period 2 is going to be sort of take care. And we have posted for the new department chair model that closes on Thursday, I believe. We have some applicants. There's some decisions that we'll need to make. There's more applicants in one area than another. But we have moved forward with the shifting model that those stages go out and we'll be making a decision shortly for that. And then the final thing is from the facility standpoint, the town is eager for us to get our stuff out of buildings out here. We've taken a tour of those. We're inventorying all the equipment, all the furniture that's back there. George is working with a plan on getting the rugs out of there and the tables and desks that the teachers have asked back at Quaker and at night school. The April vacation will be used to move this stuff out of there. Tomorrow we'll grab one of these classrooms to move for some permanent storage of some of the furniture and everything else that we don't want. We'll offer to the counter, dispose of it in some way. And that's
Department heads. Probably should be breakdown what the selection is, what the selection is. Is there a job description?
the job description is being created. Typically, as our nothing that we brought forward to the board, I can certainly share as whichever people they are, but that would be more of an internal selection. And finally, the music organist committee out of state field trip in May to Six Flags as part of the band performance. They've done in the last couple of years, but COVID has not been done. But that is in the works, and there's other field trips that are also being made out. Middle school is going someplace, and elementary school is planning to go to the clearing, correct?
Yeah.
Yes. So we're planning. We're getting back to normal in school.
Awesome.
Next.
So my report is very quick. Meetings of the board are open to the public. It is a time when the board conducts its business of governing the school system in a public arena. The regular meetings are not meant to be meetings with the public. But as a board, we have our board goals, and one of them is to be, reach out to the community and to be available. So in that light, in order to encourage dialogue, Deb and I will be available 45 minutes before the first meeting of the month to respond to community questions and concerns. The next meeting is April 5th, so we'll be available at 5:45. I'll write a small blurb in Anthony's weekly newsletter the week before that, just, I might do it the next 2 weeks, just in case people need one or the other. I want to thank Deb for adding this to her long list of meetings and responsibilities. And we're just going to see how it goes. So we just want to, when people come to audience as citizens, they come and they speak, and because of the structure of the meeting, there's no good. So we're not going to solve anything, and we might even be able to point them to, if they have an area of concern, who to speak to about that. So it's just meant to make us more available. And and if it becomes successful, we might be able to do it on a rotating basis. So that it's not just always, Deb and I, and if we, can't be more than 3 of us presenting. But just to have that conversation. So that's it for my report. So subcommittees, facilities. Deb, we have a new person. I just want to say this is a work in progress. We need to approve the course, so they don't work and get started. So we can just kind of make sure that we're this is a year-long course. The only other thing that I was going to add is that we asked, Dorothy asked the curriculum coordinator to check in, because there are districts that have run this program as a pilot program. So we asked them to check in information that she could get on their feedback of what worked with different. Because I do know that districts kind of tailored it, to their school. So so that's just another aspect of that. And this course is
That was the general thing. He volunteered to teach the class.
Shelley, did you want to say something?
I just had a quick question, and I'm sorry, I'm having a really hard time understanding what's being said. So if this has been asked and answered, or if Deb already spoke to this, please forgive me. But my question is, Deb, would the next step in this, if the board approves it, be for the teacher to bring the curriculum to the board for approval, or in your committee now, what would the process be? And thank you.
It would come to the subcommittee and then we'll bring it.
I'm sorry, did you say the curriculum next would come to the subcommittee and then to the board?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Plan on spending a lot of time going through the curriculum and having a lot of dialogue. Motion to approve the African American, Black and Puerto Rican, Latino. Any further discussion?
Discussion is this the course that the state is mandating that it's
Yes.
introduced in every public school system for 2020?
Yes, yeah. And the reason it needs to be approved now is that we need to put in the course catalog that students have an opportunity to enroll in. We don't know if there's going to be enough students that would enroll in the course to run it next year or not, so we need to at least offer it.
I believe it is currently in our schools.
It is now, yes.
Any further questions or discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Abstaining? Joe, are you good with this? Good.
Yeah, I don't know what Shelley's vote was there.
Shelley? What do you see?
Yeah, it's no problem.
Yeah, I said yes. I don't know if you could hear me or not. Did you want? I'm sorry, what did you, sorry.
No, we're good. Good now. Thank you. So motion carries. Thank you. That's it. Our next curriculum meeting is April 25th.
Our next policy meeting will be on Thursday, April 7th at 5:30. It's a virtual meeting, so if anyone wants to pop in. And if you have any policies that you'd like us to take up, please feel free to get in touch with me.
Mike, finance?
Nothing except just board of ed questions, first week of April. After we get any feedback, we'll probably schedule a meeting shortly afterwards.
And anyone, any liaison reports?
The PTO meets this Thursday night.
And we can go to the street.
I know the last meeting.
Is that really what I'm saying? Okay, that's fine. And I think that's it for So without further ado, I motion to adjourn this meeting at 8:32. Second.
Second.
All right, clear, we appreciate that. Sure can. So motion carried, meeting adjourned. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Good night, everybody.